on in here, so I want to make sure it wasn't causing issues.
We're live! Yay, it worked the first time! Yes! All right. Hi, everyone. If you are joining or watching the replay, please type replay. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about breastfeeding and formula and nutrition with all that stuff. I got stuff on my camera there with Aubrey because that's kind of her jam. And she just became a certified lactation consultant.
Did.
It's super exciting. But we all know too that like sometimes women choose not to breastfeed or can't breastfeed too. So we definitely wanted to talk about formula options and what those look like as well. We didn't want to disregard that in any way, shape, or form because everyone has their own preference and their own thing. So we're going to start with breastfeeding and then we'll kind of move into formulas and the best choices there and what to look for and things like that. So Aubrey, if you want to tell us a little bit about kind of your CLC and kind of what your journey has been like and things like that.
Sure. So obviously I was a registered dietitian first and I specialize in perinatal and pediatrics. So I'm already talking to a lot of moms about breastfeeding and making sure baby's getting enough. And so that for me, it was a really natural step to get certified to speak to them about latch issues. And instead of saying, yeah, it doesn't sound like baby's getting enough, go see someone, I could talk more about like, okay, how do we problem solve that? And honestly, it was crazy because I learned so much during that course. I'm nursing my third baby and I learned all these things that I didn't know. And I had seen lactation consultants and I was like, how did no one tell me these things? I was just shocked. So that was kind of fun and interesting. And then, yeah, like I said, I've had 3 little ones. My first one nursed until he was about 15 months. We had a love-hate relationship with nursing. I love this video because I've told people about this before on like a podcast, but you can't see and you really need the visual because he was this cranky little guy that insisted that the only way I could nurse him was like hunched over with him like underneath me. And like, it's as awkward as it looks right now. And I would have to like hold him that way. It was horrible. My neck was like on fire, but it was the only way he would nurse. And so we did that for like 15 months and I kind of like dreaded nursing him, but at the same time was like, but I love you. And then our second was 10 weeks premature, as you know, and she actually developed a severe feeding aversion and eventually had a G-tube placed for the first like year and a half of her life. She's great. She's 4 now. She's perfect. She's fine. But during that time, so she never nursed. But I pumped because I really wanted for her to get the breast milk, especially because she was a preemie. And thankfully, part of the reason I was successful was that I had already nursed a previous baby. So my body knew how to make milk because when babies are that premature, it can sometimes be really hard to get your body to make milk because the hormonal cascade that was supposed to happen didn't happen. And especially like the skin to skin and the oxytocin, like none of it happens. And so in a lot of cases with premature babies. And so it can make it like a lot of moms just don't produce milk. And so I got very lucky and produced milk, but also had some amazing mom friends that donated milk when her needs outpaced my pumping ability. Because anyone who's pumped knows that after the first like 4 to 6 months, you're pretty established. It's really hard to get your body to produce more milk from a pump. Mm-hmm. It responds well to baby if you had to produce more, but for a pump, it's really difficult to like pump even more than what you're already getting. And so I couldn't produce more. And now with our third, who will be 1 at the end of this month. Can you believe that?
I know. I was in Hocking last year when you had her. Your VBAC baby.
My VBAC baby. So she is she's amazing. She's my sweet nurser that I like could nurse her forever because she's just so sweet. Normally she like touches my face gently or touches my chest and just gazes up at me adoringly. Like I'm just the most special, wonderful person in the world. Sometimes she smacks me instead, but I mean, like generally, yeah, it's very sweet. And so she's nursing wonderfully and continues to nurse here as we roll into a year and continue doing as long as she wants to. So we'll see.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So very different experiences, from like a very difficult nursing baby to a not nursing at all, exclusively pumping baby, to now a, boy, why weren't all of mine like this, nursing baby? So I've had all three.
Right. Yeah. And I think like too, yeah, because I mean, you had, you know, 2 C-sections and then you had a VBAC, which is, you know, interesting as well. And I mean, I don't think there's no research out there about the difference between nursing with a C-section and a vaginal. It doesn't really matter. It's just kind of all in like what you prefer and all that kind of stuff. Right.
Yeah. There's a little difference in terms of C-sections. Research does suggest if you've had a C-section, those women are more likely to have issues with breastfeeding, just with milk coming in. Again, the cascade that's supposed to happen doesn't happen. And so especially because of the epidural, that can delay the onset of milk production, as well as most moms aren't getting skin to skin right away. Like in some instances, the babies are actually just being taken with dad and mom doesn't get skin to skin at all.
Right.
Yeah. And so, and if mom is groggy or tired or whatever, she might not be comfortable latching baby. And so there's a whole ripple down effect that can make it that it might not be the C-section specifically that caused the issue, but the postpartum experience can make it so that baby doesn't get the time at the breast that baby needs to get the milk production going. So a C-section can actually inhibit milk production. And that was something I was super concerned about with my first baby, because I wanted to nurse. And so I was really on top of that and making sure that he was nursing and making sure we were putting him to the breast quite a bit and doing skin to skin. But yeah, a C-section, if you've had a C-section, it's important. It's really important for any mom to see a lactation consultant and make sure that they know what's going on. But C-section moms especially, because we know that they are at an increased risk for having difficulties.
And do you recommend seeing a CLC outside the hospital?
Such a hard question.
There's a lot of doulas in the group, so I know that they're connected with a lot of CLCs that aren't hospital affiliated. So, you know, like and those people. I
will say my personal experience in 3 separate hospitals has been that the LCs at the hospital were not what I would consider good. And that I'm not gonna say that across the board. But I will say that my personal experience with them was I saw another LC outside of the hospital for every single one, and it was a much better experience for every single baby. So, I mean, to the point that with my third, I almost didn't even talk to the LC because I was just like, what she was telling me was not helpful, and I knew that. And so I was like, okay, bye. And then had someone come to the house and work with me instead, because it was, it's just, and even then I'll say that like in my training, there are a lot of things that are now outdated. And I find that a lot of the LCs in the hospitals are still recommending those practices. For example, a lot of the LCs at the hospital will tell mom to like shape the breast, that you do the C hold, and anyone who's nursed probably has heard this. You do the C hold and you bring baby to it. So the research and the current data says that you should not do that, that actually any changing of the breast shape when you're trying to get baby to latch is likely to interfere with a proper latch. You are more likely to have problems, which I never knew. And I was taught with every one of my babies to do this like C hold on my breast. And so I was shocked to learn that that was not what's currently being recommended. So I think that there's just a lot of the LCs at the hospital are more outdated is my experience. And they just might not be as up on the like current research. And I mean, if you're in the NICU, that's an entirely different
Oh yeah.
You have to know that in a NICU, you are in a pro bottle feeding environment. Even if they say like, oh yeah, we're all for breastfeeding. They're not. They're going to push bottle feeding before breastfeeding. And they're going to tell you that you can work on breastfeeding at home. And this is when, there's just a whole ripple down effect of you. Typically, baby won't end up at the breast because the NICU is just an entirely different world. Yeah.
I can imagine. And another thing that I actually ran into with, it wasn't one of my clients, but it was a friend of a client. so she was breastfeeding, and I'm sure this happens probably more frequently than we want to like admit or see, but she was like, oh, my friend's trying to lose weight, you know, like after having the baby. And I'm like, okay, well, the baby's like brand new. That like really shouldn't be her focus right now. It should be like getting strong and getting her core strength back and all the things that you and I talk about offline.
Yeah.
And she was like, yeah, and she's been like cutting, you know, she's only been eating this much and and I'm like, she's not going to be able to like know if she's undernourishing herself, which I'm sure that happens a lot and people just don't know. Like, you still need to like eat for baby and for like, producing milk. Like, it's really important to do that and still, you know, intake some of those calories. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about like nutrition in breastfeeding and kind of what the best, you know, approaches to that.
Yeah, I'm going to move myself because I'm sitting in this fun shaft of sunlight. So I wanted to make sure I wasn't like unable to be seen. So one of the most interesting things I think about the postpartum period is that you actually need more calories postpartum than at any point during your pregnancy. At any point, like the highest increased needs during pregnancy are around 300 calories a day, which to give some perspective is like a hefty scoop of peanut butter, right? Like that's 300 calories. It's a nice hefty spoonful of peanut butter. You need 500 plus more calories postpartum. So that's almost double what you need at the highest point during pregnancy. And so I say that because moms think like, oh my gosh, I got to lose the baby weight. The truth is that much of that is going to come off all on its own, especially if you ate well during the pregnancy, simply because your body has such high calorie needs. And so whether you had a vaginal birth, a C-section, especially a C-section though, or if you had tearing, your body is repairing in a C-section. You're repairing from C-sections are major surgery, major abdominal surgery. When I worked at the hospitals, your calculated energy needs are significantly higher when recovering from surgery to replace all that, the skin, all the tissue, all the organs to repair, the blood volume, all of that requires extra protein, extra nutrients, etc. So if you've had a C-section, you're also recovering from major surgery. If you've had a vaginal birth, you're recovering from that. Your uterus is shrinking, tissue damage. If you had an episiotomy or you had tears, I had tears, you're recovering from a major trauma. So again, even if you weren't nursing, you would need more calories. But when you add on top of that you're literally making food for another human, your needs are just so high. So my experience is that, a lot of moms either purposefully undernourish themselves or accidentally undernourish themselves. I know with like our first, we were so ill prepared, and my husband and I would literally high five each other if we got in 3 meals that day, because we would just, we were so tired and so exhausted. We'd like, by the time we finished one nursing session and got cleaned up and cleaned with the spit up and another poop, and it was already like dinner time, and we're like, wait, did we eat today? Like, I mean, it was just, so some of it's unintentional. And that's part of why, like when I work with moms, one of the things I really focus on is postpartum preparation, is making sure that you have easy snacks, easy go-to food, that you have a freezer full of food, that you're really prepared for postpartum. So that you can nourish your body. And as a fun point, this was something else that I thought was interesting, so in general, your body is going to be able to produce breast milk even if you're not getting adequate calories. However, if you're not getting adequate calories, you personally are likely to be more depressed, more anxious, more tired, more stressed. Those things can make you less likely to be relaxed and spending time with baby and feeling comfortable and getting baby to breast. So as a consequence, the likelihood of milk production being lower and of the breastfeeding relationship not being as good is much higher. And it's not because of the calories specifically, but because of how that will make you feel because you're not nourished.
Yeah. All the other little effects that come in.
Yes.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, because you think of like third world countries and you're like, well, those moms nurse. Yes, they do. That's your body is still capable, but it has this ripple down effect of you mentally might not be able to spend that time with baby and to relax and to be present in order to get good milk production and good letdown.
Yeah. And with that, like with the nutrition component, I remember I read in my certification that like fats were really important to intake, like fish oil, salmon, like nuts, seeds, those types of things were really good to be like those add-on calories. I don't know if you want to add anything else from your expertise that are good.
Yeah, so that's one of the few ones that, so when we talk about protein or carbs, like great, and yes, you should be choosing good sources of them, but ultimately the types you're eating are not changing the milk, so to speak. It'll still have the same amount, a proportion of carbs, protein, etc. Fat, however, is one of the exceptions. The type of fat you're eating influences the type of fat that is available in the breast milk. And so for babies, we really want to make sure we're getting enough omega-3s, like from fish and seafood, because that has a particular fatty acid called DHA, which is essential for brain development, and your body can't make it. So if you're not eating it, you're not giving it to baby. You can't. Your body doesn't have the ability to give it to baby. So if you're not able to eat a lot of fish, or if you're, I have some clients that are vegetarian or have fish allergies, looking into like an algae oil, vegan clients, etc., that a supplement is a good idea. And honestly, I take a fish oil supplement anyway, because we can't afford to eat fish multiple times a week. Yeah. Not at all. Especially, we have 2 older kids who, I kid you not, we made 2 pounds of salmon the other day. And my son was like, "Is there any more left?" I'm like, "No, why? Why?" It's unbelievable. So I can't even afford it to feed the children we have, let alone have it every day. Where it's
like, here, it's right off the boat.
Exactly. So we also have fish oil, just to make sure we're getting enough in our diets, and especially because I'm nursing, to make sure that the baby is getting enough in her diet.
Yeah, that was like the big thing that I remember just sticking out, was like the good fats, getting the good fats while you're in that postpartum phase for the breast milk and all that kind of stuff. Because again, like you said, something your body doesn't naturally do. So you gotta either supplement it or eat it. Like somewhere along the line, you gotta get it.
Exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about formula. So, some moms, sometimes they supplement with formula with breast milk. They kind of do a little bit of both. Sometimes they opt to do just formula, those types of things. So what kind of are your recommendations in terms of formulas and what to look for, or any brands that you like or things like that?
Yeah. So first, I want to just remind, so having had a baby that could not nurse or eat orally at all, I know better than most that fed is always best. However, I do think it's really important to at least supply clients with the knowledge that breast is best isn't just like a gimmick. It really is. If you can get breast milk into a baby for whatever amount of time you can, that is superior to what formula can offer. And that's simply because that's what the baby's bodies were made to have. So it offers all the right proportions of nutrients. And really importantly, the big thing is that it has something called human oligosaccharides, which is a fancy way of saying these really long carbohydrate chains. And researchers were actually really fascinated with these, because they were like, I don't get it. Babies can't digest this. Like, their digestive systems literally can't digest these chains. And it took years, decades, for them to realize that it's not to feed the baby, it's to feed the bacteria in their gut. And so this is really what starts the microbiome. So especially, exactly. So especially if you had a C-section, because that's going to change what baby is exposed to, because they don't go through the vaginal canal, and you will probably got antibiotics to avoid an infection, or if you had antibiotics during the labor for GBS, etc., that breastfeeding can actually shift the microbiome as if you had had a vaginal birth. So it can overcome the thing that discrepancy in the type of birth, which I think is amazing, because if you have to have a C-section, there's really nothing you can do about that, right? And it's easy to feel like, oh my God, I can't do anything. You can. Breastfeeding can actually shift the microbiome back in the right direction. We know that breast milk is so complex and amazing, in that if you get donor milk that's been pasteurized, it still will produce a microbiome more similar to a breastfed baby than a formula will. So
Wow.
even pasteurized, the milk still has a different effect. And it also has a lot of immune properties, which is the other big thing, is that you can really help bolster baby's immune system because they're passing that on and they're feeding off of mom. There's an interchange that baby nurses and mom's body get signals of, hey, I'm getting exposed to this. I need you to make antibodies. Hey, I'm really dehydrated. Can you make more liquid water, less fat in here? Hey, I'm pretty hungry. Can you get more fat in this? Like there is this really cool back and forth. And I can say that even with Elsie, our middle one, she didn't nurse, but just having skin to skin, my milk was entirely different from her than it was for the other two. Like it literally had this like inch wide cream layer on top. So it was like super fatty. Even though she wasn't nursing directly, somehow my body being with her and around her knew that she needed a different kind of milk. So I emphasize all that because if you could even nurse for a week, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it is, that's better than not nursing at all, if that's a possibility, or pumping and offering breast milk. And I can also say that studies suggest that the first like month is the most critical, that if you can get through the first month, most moms will then make it to like 6 months. So it's that first like few weeks that's when you really need the support, and then you're more likely to have success. If that's not an option, or if it's just not working out, because I also believe that it's really important that mom and baby are bonding well. So if nursing is this horribly traumatic thing and you hate it and you hate every second of it, and I have clients like that, and you've tried support and you've done everything you can and it is just not working, whatever that is, I respect saying, this is not healthy. This is not the relationship I want with my baby. And that is a perfectly valid time to say, this isn't working for me. What I typically recommend, the formulas I like best are their HIP, HIPPE, and Hall, HOLLE, and they're goat milk based formulas. They're out of Europe as well. So Europe has higher standards for their packaged products. I know their ingredients tolerance is much lower. They are really strict about what can and can't go into food, especially baby food. So these are just cleaner ingredients. You're not going to get like corn syrup solids and like GMO soy oil and just stuff that really nobody should be exposed to, let alone a newborn baby. Plus the goat milk is, not going into crazy detail, there are two types of milk in terms of like what type of protein is in them. One is A1, one is A2. A1 is harder to digest. A2 is like the original milk. Goat milk is naturally A2, so it is easier for a baby to digest. And traditionally, if you look like into cultures where there wasn't a wet nurse or a mom needed to like couldn't nurse, like literally had to make her own formula, goat milk was often used. That's like traditionally what was used. So those are both goat milk based formulas, which I prefer for babies. If you can't get that, because you do have to order that, again, looking for something. So there are a couple things that I like people to look for. First, it should have DHA. You want it to have that omega-3 fatty acid in it. Second, we really want it to have prebiotics. So that's what feeds the good bacteria. So it won't do the same as those human oligosaccharides, but it's better than nothing, if that makes sense. So you can get something that has a prebiotic in it. And then third, I really encourage people to look for things that, just like with their own stuff, as much as you want whatever it is to sound as much like a real food as possible. So you're seeing lots of isolated soy protein hydrosylate,
sodium.
Yeah. If you can't,
what the hell is that? Let me Google that.
If you can't Google it and get an image, like an image of something, you're like, oh, I know what that is. It probably shouldn't be in your infant's food. So that's like my general recommendation, is trying to be very conscious of that. However, I will say these other formulas cost more and they're hard to get. And sometimes you need insurance to cover them, or you need WIC to cover them, and they won't cover these. So get the highest quality you can get that baby tolerates, and then consider supplementing. Consider adding a prebiotic. Consider adding the fish oil or something like that. Consider adding, seeing if you can connect with a milk bank and adding some breast milk, right? Like that's what I would recommend doing. See if there are some other options out there that you can make the best of whatever situation you're in, because I absolutely acknowledge that not everybody can spend a lot of money on these really nice formulas. Unfortunately, like it should really be available to everybody. And I'll also say the caveat to that is, now that I've said this, don't go out and just get goat milk. That is not an acceptable substitute for breast milk or formula. I have a lot of moms. When I worked at WIC, we had moms who came in and they didn't understand why the baby wasn't gaining weight. And they had on their own decided to just go get like almond milk from the store and were using that as formula because they thought any milk would work. And so I want to really impress that that is not true. You cannot just substitute milk of any sort. It needs to be a formula or breast milk, or there are some homemade formulas, but you want to talk with a dietitian or someone before you just go, I found this on Google. Like, don't do that. Just as a heads up, don't do that. And I'll also note that if you're a mom who was nursing and then you're not nursing and you're having trouble getting baby to take the formula, especially babies that like have food allergies, and mom switches because they're trying to see like how to help baby, and they're on what's called an elemental formula. So that means all of the proteins are broken down so baby won't react to them. They taste gross. And if a baby has been nursing and switches to this, many babies are like, oh, hell no, because it's not good. One of the tricks I can recommend is babies are like, they won't touch it because it smells horrible. Like the idea that a baby would want to drink that, it's just gross. But sometimes that's what you need in order for baby to be nourished. So one of the tricks I can recommend is that, one, if you're pumping, try making a slow transition so that you like start with 3/4 breast milk and 1/4 of the formula and slowly transition, because that can help. And if that's still not enough, one of the other options is to use non-alcohol based vanilla extract. So get the one without alcohol and just put a little bit in, but that often is enough to change the flavor that baby doesn't dislike it as much. Because remember, breast milk is naturally very sweet and kind of salty. And so formulas, especially soy or elemental formulas, tend to be bitter. And that's just not a flavor that babies are like naturally supposed to like. They're not, that doesn't build into their taste repertoire until they are older. And so they just instinctually reject that because they're all their instincts say, this is not right. This is not something I should be eating. So the vanilla extract, and you can get other extracts too. You can get like banana sometimes is one babies like, or maple, but just make sure it's non-alcohol based and just teeny bit, work with it. Yeah. But that's often a way to get babies to take it if you're having a really hard time getting them to take this new, maybe not so great tasting formula, especially with those elemental formulas.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, thanks, Aubrey. I think that was we're almost at a half an hour. So that's like
perfect.
So if anyone watches the replay and has any questions for Aubrey, feel free to post them in the comments. She'll definitely pop in and answer anything you ask. And we'll be back. And we're talking about PCOS next month.
Next month. Yep.
Yes. And then Jeriel has someone next week. I think it's next week or the week after, about Black Breastfeeding Week, which I'm really excited about too. So
I think it's next week.
I think it's next week. I think it's next Wednesday.
Yeah, we're taking advantage of National Breastfeeding Month here in August.
And then we'll have a bunch of cool topics in September too. So awesome. Thanks, Aubrey.
Okay.
Thanks.